Hello and welcome back to our process costing lecture videos. And so in this one I'm going to cover the production cost report and a few other tidbits on process costing, and then I'll have one final lecture video after this one covering some additional problems at the end of chapter 3. Okay, so it says right over here at the end of each month each department is going to prepare a report called a production cost report, and that's going to be that will have a unit reconciliation, a calculation of cost per equivalent for unit, and then also the cost reconciliation. Okay, so let's go through and look at each one of those components. So again, as I mentioned before, the first part will have a unit reconciliation. Okay, the second part will be a calculation of cost per unit, and then the third part will be a cost reconciliation. Okay. So you look over here, it says the following data are for the first processing department at Midwest Refining, a company that reclaims petroleum products from used motor oil. We have our beginning units of 10,000. Those are 60% complete with respect to materials, 50% complete with respect to conversion. Again, that's not going to matter for what we need to do. Okay, because we're using the weighted average, which in that case does not consider the beginning units. Now, the cost of beginning units, cost of beginning inventory, yes, but not the number. If we're using first in, first out, then this would matter. But we're not. We're using equivalent, weighted average costing. Okay, so this is going to matter. The cost of our beginning WIP, 4,300 with respect to materials, 7,600 with respect to conversion. Units started production, 190,000. Costs added during the department, 74,100 for materials, 144,400 for conversion. And then we have our units completed, 180,000. Units in ending WIP, 20,000, then 80 and 25. Okay. Now, this number over here, this will matter for our unit reconciliation, which we're going to do now. But in terms of calculating our cost per unit, it's not going to matter. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to look at is our unit reconciliation, which accounts for the flow of units through the department. And we're going to say our units to be accounted for, then we had our 10,000 units in beginning WIP. That's from right here. And then we started 190,000 units. Means we have 200,000 units to be accounted for. Now those units are either going to go to the next department when they're finished, or they're going to stay in ending work in process if they're not finished. So that gives us our unit reconciliation formula. We say beginning WIP plus units started, so beginning with units, equals units transferred out plus units in ending WIP. We come over here and we have those 10,000 units plus the 190,000 units equals the units transferred out, which you can see right over here is 180,000 units, and then in the units in ending WIP. And we reconcile, check. Okay? Now let's go and look at the second thing, which is the calculation of our cost per unit. Now what might be a good idea is for you to pause the lecture video and then see if you can't calculate out the cost per unit for materials in conversion, and then figure out the total unit cost, and then come back to the lecture video. Okay? But it's up to you. That would just be my recommendation, just to get a little bit of independent practice and see how you do. Okay? So if we look over here, cost to be accounted for, we had WIP beginning, 4,300 for materials, 7,600 for conversion. I'm just pulling these numbers from the prior page right over here. And we added the 74,100, and we had the 140,400, and we can add to get the total WIP cost, total beginning WIP cost, 11,900. Total costs added gives us 214,500, and then the total cost to be accounted for right over here, 226,400, and then we can add down. We can say our 78,400, and then what we have is our 148 right there. Okay, just added down like that. Now we have our equivalent units, our denominator calculation for calculating our average cost per unit. When we calculate, we transferred out 180,000 units. In either scenario, for materials and for conversion, they're done. And then plus WIP ending. So we had 20,000 units in ending WIP, 80% complete with respect to materials, 25% complete with respect to conversion. So I'm going to go 20,000 times 8.8 for materials and 20,000 times 0.25 for conversion. Okay, so I get my 16,000, which is again equal to my 20,000 plus my percent complete of 80%. I get 196. Over here I go my 20,000 times 0.25, which gives me my 5,000. I add the two, 185. And then I can calculate my cost per unit. So I can take my 78.4 divided by my 196, which gives me 0.4. That will equal 0.40 cents for materials. And I'll do the same thing over here for conversion. 400 divided by 185, which equals 0.8. So now the total is 1.2. Okay, $1.20. I hope you got that right. So on the next page, we're going to go ahead and figure out, and you may want to pause the lecture video again here and calculate out the cost of the units transferred out and the cost of the units in ending WIP. Okay, so you may want to pause the lecture video to see if you can't calculate that before I go over it, and then also go over the cost reconciliation. All right, I'm going to start going over it. So how many units were transferred out? 180,000. The cost per unit, as we saw on the prior page, is $1.20. So I'm going to take my 180,000 times my $1.20. Gives me the cost of the units transferred out is $2.60. Again, that's my 180,000 units times the $1.20 per unit. Could you go 180,000 times 0.4 plus 180,000 times 0.8 and add them together? Yep, same answer. So we can look at the cost of our ending WIP with respect to materials, and we had 16,000 equivalent full units with respect to materials and 5,000 in conversion. Our materials cost was 40 cents, so 16,000 times 0.4 gives us 6,400. Again, that's my 16,000 times my 0.4, 6,400, and then 5,000 times my 0.8. Okay, so then that'll give me my $4,000, and I can add the two together. It gives me 10,400, and then I can say the cost of my units transferred out plus the cost of my units in ending WIP gives me the total cost of my units to be accounted for, 226.4. Okay, now if you looked on the prior page, you can see that this number of 226.4 looks pretty familiar. That's also equal to the cost of the units in beginning WIP plus the cost added. So if you think about it, we have this much cost to be accounted for. Where's it going to go? It's either going to go to the cost of the units transferred out or the cost of the units in ending WIP. Okay, so we can then figure out our cost reconciliation formula here. Simply by taking our beginning WIP costs plus costs incurred, extra costs incurred, equals cost units out plus cost units ending WIP. And with respect to what we've done here, remember we have our beginning WIP costs of 11.9 plus we added 214,500 equals our 216, cost of units transferred out, plus our 10,400 cost of units in ending WIP. We check out in all is well and right in the world. Okay, So that concludes our production report, which again has our unit reconciliation, the calculation of the cost per unit, and then our cost reconciliation. Okay. Let's go over a few more tidbits here, and then I'll end this lecture video, and then we'll have one more that covers some additional problems. So in terms of dealing with transferred in cost, when the units are completed in one processing department, it's going to be transferred to the next processing department. Okay? This procedure is going to be completed until they hit the last work in process, and so at that point, they'll be transferred to finished goods. Okay. So if you think about this in terms of a transferred in cost for the production department that receives the cost, they're just going to add that to calculating out their cost per unit. And that's all I kind of really want you to know about that. I'm not going to include any problems with transferred in costs, but it will be treated as coming into calculating the cost per unit for the department that receives the cost. Okay. This process costing and then an incremental analysis. Whenever we make a decision, we need to think about incremental analysis. When we use process costing information, we have to be careful to recognize that the cost per unit is the average of fixed and variable. Right? So now, if we're thinking about doing something, though, and we still incur those same fixed costs, those fixed costs will not be relevant. Okay? So if we look over here, we have two problems. Okay? The first one is we have for 2012, or you can change that for any year you want to. We said during the year the company incurs $100,000 of materials, labor, overhead, 200,000 units that sell for $325. Calculate out the profit. So we come over here. We're going to say our revenue is going to be equal to our 325 times the 200,000. Okay. And then our direct materials costs will be equal to our 100. Remember, that's just given to us. Well, I'm just going to cross that out. It would be easier. I'm going to say my total cost will be equal to my 100,000 plus my 200,000, okay, plus my 300,000. Total cost is 600,000. So revenues minus total cost gives you a profit of 50,000 when you work out the math. Okay. Now, if we're thinking about changing the sale price to $2.90 from $3.25, and then as a result, we increase the units sold to $75,000. Is this a good idea? So the first thing is we're going to calculate the incremental revenue. Incremental revenue. We're going to come over here and we're going to take $2.90 times our 275,000 units. Remember, because it was at our 200,000 units that increased by 75 to 275. And then that gives us our $797,500. So this is our original revenue. And then we can say, this is our new revenue, sorry. And we can say our original revenue is equal to our 325 times our 200,000, which gives us our 650,000. So the increase in revenue is equal to 147,500. Now let's look at the increase in costs. Okay? Which costs are we going to incur? We're going to incur more direct materials and more direct labor. And how much are we going to have? Well, what I need to do over here is I first need to put my direct materials and my direct labor on a unit basis. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to say my direct materials, 100,000 divided by 200,000 units gives me 0.5. In my direct labor, I take my 200,000 divided by 200, so my labor cost is $1. So then when I come over here and I'm calculating this out, I'm going to say I'm going to get an additional cost of my 112,500. Okay, that's my incremental cost. 0.5 times the 200 plus 1 I'm sorry, 0.5 times the 75 and 0.5 times the 1 times the 75.